Welcome. My name is Mark Depue. I'm the Director of Oral History here at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Museum. Today's episode for Lincoln 101 is all about General George McClellan and the relationship that Abraham Lincoln had with his general early in the war. We find the first action in the Civil War to be the Battle of Bull Run, the first Battle of Bull Run. And in that case, we have General Irvin McDowell is command of the Union forces at the battle. It does not go well for the Union forces. There's this retreat back to Washington, D.C., actually a rout. It's ugly. And now you find Abraham Lincoln is trying to find the right person to command his army in the field, especially the army that is in Virginia, the army that will become known as the Army of the Potomac. What he finds is a young officer, 36-year-old General George McClellan, who has just had success in Western Virginia. And so he brings McClellan east, talks to him about being commander, and as far as McClellan's concerned, there's no doubt that he's up for this job. McClellan is brilliant. He was identified in the Mexican War as one of the most, the brightest stars, up-and-comer for the military. He had experience being an observer in Europe, learning about the European way of the style of warfare. He actually designed his own saddle. He's arrogant. He's egotistical. He is also a superb organizer and trainer. And he's the kind of person that Lincoln needs to pull this rabble that he's got together and create an army out of it. McClellan sinks his teeth in late July, July 27th, I believe, is when he is commanded. He's given the command. And for the next few months, he's busy reorganizing the Army of the Potomac, restructuring it, pumping in some morale and some discipline into the troops as well. He has great charisma. The troops are drawn to him naturally, and he has this following. But there's a bumpy relationship between himself and Lincoln. Lincoln, characteristically, has to feel out McClellan, goes to his office many times. It doesn't have McClellan come to his office. He oftentimes will just show up by surprise at McClellan's office, sit down, tell stories, look at maps, make suggestions that, as far as McClellan is concerned, are off the wall, don't really apply to anything. And they have this dialogue back and forth. Over time, McClellan kind of appreciates Lincoln, but he also knows in his mind that Lincoln is his social and intellectual inferior. And in one letter, famous letter, he makes this quote.
Dear Ellen, I went to the White House shortly after tea, where I found the original gorilla about as intelligent as ever. What a specimen to be at the head of our affairs now.
That gets you a pretty good feel of that relationship that they have. Now, it's shortly after that McClellan has a very famous encounter with Lincoln himself. And this one is a story that we hear from Lincoln's secretary, John Hay.
I wish here to record what I consider a portent of evil to come. The President, Governor Seward, and I went over to McClellan's house tonight. The servant at the door said the general was at the wedding of Colonel Wheaton and General Buell's and would soon return. We went in, and after we had waited about an hour, McClellan came in, and without paying any particular attention to the porter, who told him the President was waiting to see him, went upstairs, passing the door of the room where the President and Secretary of State were seated. They waited about half an hour, and sent once more a servant to tell the general they were there, and the answer coolly came that the general had gone to bed. I merely record this unparalleled insolence of epaulets without comment. It is the first indication I have yet seen of the threatened supremacy of the military authorities. Coming home, I spoke to the President about the matter, but he seemed not to have noticed it, specially, saying it was better at this time not to be making points of etiquette and personal dignity.
Isn't that story so indicative of who Abraham Lincoln is? Being deferential to the point of almost a fault and allowing McClellan to treat him like that, if only McClellan will bring him victories. That's the key. Fast forward a couple of months now, there's still not much movement. McClellan has superbly trained army now at his hands, but now the politicians and other generals are putting pressure on Lincoln, and especially putting pressure on McClellan to do something with this force. Welcome to the War Department's Telegraph Office, a place that Abraham Lincoln, in the next few years of the war, is get to know very well, since he's going to spend a lot of his time, anytime his armies are in the field in open combat, this is where Abraham Lincoln wanted to be. And if you listen closely, you might even be able to hear the teletype clicking in the background there. In March of 1862, George McClellan finally takes his massive Army of the Potomac south. In the vicinity of Yorktown. It's a naval movement, and now is going to be fighting this army north between two major rivers straight towards Richmond, Virginia. That is McClellan's target. Once the army is there, over 100,000 strong, they move forward but are very cautious, and Lincoln now discovers a couple other major flaws in his commander, George McClellan. I should also point out at this very time, Lincoln has decided to become his own general-in-chief as well as the commander-in-chief of all forces. And this is because McClellan couldn't possibly control what was going on in the Western Theater at the same time. And it's this period that we see Abraham Lincoln most active in commanding forces in the field. Forces in Virginia, in Western Virginia, and in the Western Theater itself. As McClellan is moving north, very slowly, he's constantly demanding more troops, more horses, more munitions, more supplies. And it gets to be the constant refrain from McClellan. He never has enough. He always is going to overestimate the strength of the enemy forces that he's facing. He has Pinkerton detectives who are collecting this intelligence for him. They are usually off by a factor of twice or three times as many Confederate forces as McClellan is actually facing. It makes him even more timid. He's always going to be looking for those numbers that are the worst and play it up. And you find now that McClellan's biggest problem once he's commanding the field is he's timid. He's slow. And he also cares about his soldiers deeply and hates the notion of serious combat and lots of casualties. That's how much he loves the Army, and it reflects how much they love him as commander as well. The Peninsular Campaign does not go well, and by July, Lincoln and everybody in Washington, D.C. are growing tired of McClellan. It's about this time that Robert E. Lee takes command of the Army of Northern Virginia, and in a series of battles over 7 days, just outside of Richmond itself, basically a battle to the draw, but now McClellan is being called north. At the same time McClellan is moving his massive force, again mostly by water, north, you see Lee shift and move towards Washington, D.C. himself, and now he's facing an army commanded by General Pope, who had been brought over from the Western Theater. Pope is defeated in the Second Battle of Bull Run. And once again, Abraham Lincoln is going to be turning to George McClellan to save his army, to rebuild the army, and to get them on good standing again, even though essentially by this time, Abraham Lincoln has removed General McClellan out of command. The Battle of Bull Run is at the end of August of 1862. And it's after that battle that General McClellan is finding himself once again in command to be the savior of the Union Army, a role that he relished. But wily General Lee, at the same time, makes a move to the west and then straight north into Maryland to invade Yankee territory and to take the offensive and to get the initiative once again. Now, this gives Lincoln no choice but to effectively give McClellan command in the field as well, something he was reluctant to do. But now you've got Lee's forces moving aggressively into Maryland. He has no choice but to let McClellan take battlefield command as well, but gives him this advice: destroy the rebel army. Lee's army, and not Richmond, is your true objective point. So now you've got Lee's forces on the move, and you've got McClellan now once again on the move, moving into Maryland. At this point in time, you have one of the most fortunate events of the Civil War happen, when one of McClellan's staff officer finds some cigars, and wrapped around the cigars are the battle plans for Robert E. Lee's movement into Maryland. This is perfect for him. And he finally knows the disposition of the rebel forces. He knows that Jackson is going to be preoccupied at Harper's Ferry for a while the rest of Lee's forces are moving towards Antietam Creek and farther north than that. So McClellan moves as quickly as McClellan can. It's still slower than the rebel forces are moving, but it's fast as far as McClellan is concerned. And they finally have this meeting engagement at Antietam Creek. And it's a draw. As far as McClellan is concerned, it's a great victory. The result of that is that Lee and his forces have seriously been bloodied in the bloodiest battle, bloodiest day, I should say, of the Civil War itself, and Lee is now moving south. October 1st, Abraham Lincoln actually shows up on the battlefield and meets with his commander, who feels very good about what he's now accomplished. Lincoln is prodding McClellan, move after the enemy. Pursuit is the key. Beat them at the river. Don't let them cross the river. Now is the time to strike. McClellan, again, goes with the typical refrain, we need to rest our army. Our troops are fatigued. Our horses are fatigued. And you finally get this wonderful quote.
I have just read your dispatch about sore-tongued and fatigued horses. Will you pardon me for asking what the horses of your army have done since the Battle of Antietam that fatigue anything?
It's obvious from that quote that Lincoln has finally lost his patience with George McClellan. And after the election, the midterm elections, Lincoln is going to replace McClellan, relieve him of command. In September of that same year, just a few months before, you see where Lincoln is maturing as a strategist as well. That is the time he's made the decision to release the Emancipation Proclamation, which is going to have a huge impact on the future of the war for the rest of that. It reveals that Lincoln, better than any of his generals, understands the role of strategy, of politics and strategy, of the military aspects, of technological innovations, bringing everything together to understand the implications that a decision like that will have on the larger conduct of the war. Next time we get together, we'll take a look at Lincoln's relationship with General Ulysses S. Grant. And I look forward to seeing you again.